Right, and they can't see us at all, can they?
No, they should be able to. Can I just confirm that everyone can see and hear us on the call?
Oh, is that us at the top?
At the top, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Very long table, but we can see you.
Excellent, thank you. Lord Aberdare has very kindly.
Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. Lord Aberdare has very kindly agreed to step in to chair the beginning of the meeting while Jonathan makes his way over from the chamber. So I'll hand over to Lord Aberdare now.
Thank you, Oliver, and good afternoon, everybody. We have at the moment, I think, a larger number of online attendees than those in person here. But oh yes, we have a huge number of online attendees. So welcome everybody to this meeting of the Apprenticeships All-Party Parliamentary Group on the subject of apprenticeships and T-levels. I have just been given the opportunity to chair it, so don't expect a great deal of fluency about this, but we have hopefully three speakers: Jason Beaumont from Access Creative College, Bev White from Nash Squared, and John Cope from UCAS. And the session is going to consider the impact of T-levels on apprenticeships and assess if these T-levels, I assume, are supporting the upskilling of the workforce, as well as looking at how business can most effectively upskill their staff. And we're also going to look at how degree apprenticeships represent a key step on the ladder of opportunity, which has very much come back into fashion with Robert Hawthorne in his new ministerial post, that apprenticeships provide, and how they offer a rewarding education and training route for students, while also helping employers to attract and retain talent while boosting productivity. So that's what we're trying to do, and each speaker is going to speak for about 5 minutes, and then at the end we'll have a Q&A. So we've done the housekeeping, I think, have we, Oliver? That's all done. So let's move straight on, I hope, to the first. Where's the first speaker? Here or there? So the first speaker is Jason Beaumont, who's Chief Executive of Access Creative College. And Jason, over to you to get us started. There he is. You're muted at the moment.
Pilot error. There you go. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for the invitation to attend today's session. I would have been there in person had it not been for the rail strikes. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I'm Chief Executive of Access Creative College and our wider group businesses, which includes Access Sport, National College for Creative Industries, and the DBS Institute, our HE provider. We've been around for 30 years, and we're a national provider with campuses in London, Bristol, Norwich, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, now Nottingham, with over 5,000 students and apprentices studying level 2 to level 7, and 80% of our learners are aged 16 to 19. Our core curriculum is creative and sport, with film, games technology, photography, graphic design, music, events, and visual effects, alongside sports media, science, and coaching. We launched our School of Computing in 2021, focused on software development based around the introduction of T-levels. We have a diverse demographic of students, with over half coming from areas of major income deprivation affecting children. 50% of our ethnically diverse learners come from the bottom 2 multiple deprivation codes, with over 30% of our learners with disclosed learning difficulties. Social mobility is high on our agenda, and we perform at twice the national average when it comes to students progressing to higher education from Polar 4, Quintile 1 regions, with 6 out of 10 of our learners now going on to higher education. This is all supported and evidenced in our recent Ofsted report. I think when considering the importance of apprenticeships and T-levels complementing each other instead of clashing, I think firstly, we need to consider the appropriateness of the offer for the difference in our school leavers. Are they competing for the same person? School attainment, attendance, exam performance, personal development, aspiration, or lack of are all just part of the profiling that needs to determine which route is most suitable. The DfE policy paper on T-levels says T-levels from an apprentice, difference from T-levels from an apprenticeship An apprenticeship is most suited to those who want to earn a wage and learn at the same time. This narrative is often used, but I feel misses whether the route is appropriate for many young people. Is this the perspective of the young person or the determination of the work readiness? The current national retention and achievement rates for apprenticeships may support some of this thinking. It has to be right course, right choice. Secondly, a consideration is how the sectors differ. It's widely acknowledged that the creative industries are dominated by SME businesses, with a majority having between 10 and 50 employees. Most don't have a HR department, and it's very rare that any have a work placement or detailed apprenticeship strategy. For the creative industries, and I sense many SME businesses outside of traditional routes of construction, engineering, hairdressing, will predominantly look for post-18s for their apprenticeship recruitment. Our employer forums and roundtables are pretty unanimous. The broader skills, often referred to as soft, which I really don't like, are key to their recruitment decisions of new, young people starting out on their journey. At Access, we call this raising the bar, being bravery, adaptability, ambition, and resilience. Often characteristics not yet developed enough in our 16-year-olds, school leavers. So I believe an intrinsic link between T-levels and apprenticeships is essential and should demonstrate a connected progression route into intermediate and higher apprenticeship standards. And this is patchy at best. Information, advice and guidance for our young people starts at year 10. You'll do well to find a careers advisor working in schools who can articulate well a journey narrative outside of A-levels to university. I'm confident, and very confident, that successful T-level alumni will be the cream of the crop for employers when it comes to supporting the continuation of training into higher and degree apprenticeships in the pursuit of meeting their skills needs, and often as important, their diversity agenda. I'm certainly really excited to find employers for our first T-level leavers that leave this summer. Final point from me, I do feel there needs to be a greater emphasis on the mapping of all educational products and pathways from a macro viewpoint and seeing them side by side. More research is needed on profiling of historic data, looking at prior attainment, attendance, progression outcomes, and destinations of all pathways. We need an evidence-led and data-driven profile of products and pathways that help inform which door the young person should go through. Getting it right from the start is essential in the successful outcomes. A coherent journey, easily understood by all and regionally accessible by all. I think that was less than 5 minutes.
Well, it was certainly well within the appropriate envelope. So thank you very much for that. And lots of good material for thought and discussion. Let's go straight on to our next speaker, who is Bev White, CEO of Nash Squared. And I should say that I gather John Cope is at a meeting at an important venue just along the road in Whitehall from here. So he may arrive a little late. So we will probably have an initial discussion and Q&A session after Bev has spoken, and then when John arrives, we'll switch back to him, and then we'll switch back to the Q&A. But meanwhile, over to you, Bev White.
Thank you very much, and a welcome to everyone on the call this afternoon. I'm delighted to be invited to speak to the APPG. I'm really pleased to be able to speak about the importance both of T-levels and apprenticeships. Nash Squared is a leading global technology and talent provider. We've helped organisations recruit highly skilled technology talent, including companies like Meta and global financial institutions around the world. In the UK, we aim to support the British workforce into highly skilled and long-lasting jobs as part of our mission to tackle the technology skills deficit. So the topic of today's meeting, we feel we have really a big stake in. As a starting point, I'd like to draw your attention to this year's Nash Squared Digital Leadership Report, where we surveyed over 2,000 business leaders and decision makers from around the world on major trends and challenges in today's technology and digital world, including skills. In over 2 decades, we've run this report, and we've never seen results quite this stark. The report found that 70% of this year's digital leaders state that a skill shortage prevents them from keeping up with the pace of change. This is the largest we've seen in the report since we started over 24 years ago. One thing is certainly clear from our report, that there is no let up on the war for tech talent, and the key to meeting this demand is a system of further and higher education that supports the tech talent pipeline. However, we have not seen the progress that we need. On average, a staggering 74% of digital leaders feel that government policies are completely ineffective in tackling the digital skill shortage. Indeed, the overriding feedback we receive from the digital leaders is that government-led initiatives are too slow and don't respond to the rapidly changing world of technology. We see T-levels and apprenticeships as a crucial opportunity in the journey to tackling this. Not only do they allow young people to get their hands on experience that they really desperately need early in their careers, but as part of the ladder of opportunity, they open doors, bringing in a more diverse crowd to our industry. Nash Squared is committing to improving FE provision for tech and digital skills. Indeed, we're really thrilled to be working with colleagues at the Department for Education and NCFE to build the syllabus for the new cybersecurity pathway of the Digital Support Services T-level. We're also pleased to see the need for this qualification recognised by the DfE, given that Microsoft have found that 40% of all nation-state cyber attacks are now against critical national infrastructure, whilst the second most sought after tech professionals are in cybersecurity. The moment now is to act on cyber education for our young people, and T-levels certainly provide the vehicle for this. Our US-based Chief Information Security Officer, Jim Tiller, has been working to ensure the qualification will not only be a rigorous education for young people, but it will also be an inspiring window into the world of cyber and all the careers that comes from that. The ever-changing need of cyber also means that we will remain on the oversight group for this qualification, ensuring that the T-level continues to move with the times and provides relevant skills to young people as they look to enter our industry and move on further with their study. Once up and running, we expect to build a new and exciting path for young people directly into the growing tech apprenticeship space. We run a degree apprenticeship program for our businesses, taking a really diverse group of people into the Microsoft solution space, which is just one example of the multitude of tech-based apprenticeships out there. So what do we see the future of T-levels and how they can contribute and build on the existing apprenticeship provision? Well, at Nash Squared, we'd love to see more schools and colleges embracing T-levels and apprenticeships in the first place. We know that students have a strong desire to get out into the workforce and learn practical skills on the job. So it's a shame that we don't see as many education providers let young people know that the pathways exist for them to do this. We're pleased to see the government doing more to strengthen progression pathways in further education, creating those clearly defined academic and technical routes that deliver high quality qualifications that build towards skilled employment. And we must keep emphasising that there is an arch to their academic careers and that you no longer need a university degree to access jobs in the world's largest tech companies. I think also we'd like to see that the apprenticeships are restricted by the economic opportunities open to them in the area. And what that means for many young people that live in disadvantaged areas, that they don't have the means to travel to the tech hub entities for work and training. We fear that this same fate will undertake those undertaking the T-level work placements in cybersecurity. And we ask that the government do more to widen the opportunities open for meaningful placements at a variety of businesses, perhaps through maintenance funding. Finally, I would like to say on a personal plea that we'd like to see the government consider T-levels and apprenticeships continuing as pathways to improve diversity and social mobility, particularly in tech. As members of the Apprenticeship Diversity Champions Network, Nash Squared is working with the Department for Education to champion apprenticeships and diversity and encourage more people from underrepresented groups, including those with disabilities, women, and members of minority communities, to consider apprenticeships. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you too for keeping well within the appropriate time envelope and for raising some important and interesting subjects. And one of the themes already today seems to be on issues of disadvantage and diversity, and how T-levels and apprenticeships can provide suitable opportunities for people in those situations. Now, there's no sign of John Cope, so we will start an initial discussion and Q&A session. And as is normal in these events, I will start by asking if any parliamentarians wish to ask questions or make comments. I see we have at least 3 on the screen that I can see there: Lord Lilly, Lord Watson, and Peter Bottomley. And they appear in that order on the screen. So I will ask them in that order whether they wish to make a contribution. Lord Lilly, would you like to ask a question or make a comment? And you're muted at the moment, if you're indeed there.
Here, I am here, and I hope I'm now unmuted. I'd like something more sort of concrete about what needs to be done to make these routes work, rather than saying we want a route that works. What needs to be done?
That's a good challenge for Jason and Bev to take up. Jason, you're muted again.
I mean, I can really talk from the creative side. I'll let Bev, cover digital, which has seen quite an exponential expansion in apprenticeships over the last few years. From the digital side, it is about supporting the SMEs and encouraging them to take on apprenticeships. And as that point I made earlier is around, a lot of those are looking at apprenticeships, that have got some of the basic skills and some of the core life skills embedded. So, starting at 18, but they are small businesses, and, there has been a number of support mechanisms in the past, certainly through COVID, to support those businesses in onboarding apprentices. And I think we should look at, readdressing some of that support that the government can give to new businesses to take on within the creative arena.
Thank you. That's a very good issue, which I strongly agree with, having run a small business myself, and appreciating the challenges of the time, effort, and bureaucracy involved in taking on an apprentice. Bev.
I think I completely understand your frustration in hearing people say things aren't working. So asking, well, what can we do then? I appreciate that question. I think the government is doing a lot towards that now, in terms of T-levels and apprenticeships being more widely available. I think in terms of accessibility, though, for people perhaps who live in places that they don't have advantage, they don't have money to travel to where they need to get the training, they don't have the means in which to be able to apply for the jobs. I think we need to provide as much on the ground support as we possibly can through the education system and through job centres, for example. The FE colleges, I think, are doing a huge amount of work to support people in the local areas. But of course, it's the people we're missing that we want to attract into this world. So people that perhaps wouldn't consider a career in tech. And I think, using social channels, because young people quite often use social channels to influence their future thinking, to educate them towards the opportunities in T-levels and apprenticeships. But I also think that they need financial support to get to these locations. And so being able to provide these maintenance grants and so on, I think will get more people into the industry. I'm deeply encouraged, though. I think there is no better place in the world to actually have a tech community than in the UK. We're highly innovative as a culture. I think we have developed some amazing products and services over the years, and I really am thrilled to be part of this industry. We just need to get more young people to see this as a fantastic career.
Bev, one of the points you made was that not enough schools are actually offering T-levels. Is there something that should be done to increase the number that are taking up the opportunity and providing those?
I think maybe there's a little caution, and maybe Jason might be able to speak with more knowledge, as he's directly in this community. But I would say it's almost a little bit of let's trial it and see. And my proposal would be lean in, these work. Let's get going and show people that there's a real advantage to put T-levels out there. But Jason, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from our digital, we've seen, great growth year on year. We started it, in 21, and this year we've seen, some fairly steep growth, and quite excited that continues. And as then they bring on more within the creative arena with a broadcast one coming out next year, we're fully on board with the strategy. I mean, we do need to be slightly wary of that. It's a very different, experience to apply general courses. These people have chosen not to do A levels for a reason. It's still an exam based, qualification, and so I think certainly from a general FE provider, to an extent, you are cautious looking at the demographic and the type of learners to make sure we maximise achievement, with T levels being quite heavily based around exam based study, not something that the FE sector's done historically, and not something that those learners are particularly good at times. So there has been caution, and I think we're all learning and reorientated our delivery and pedagogy to make sure we can get those learners through those exams. There is the challenge of work experience as well as scaling that up, and particularly in certain areas, as you rightly point out, Bev, where there might not be those work placements. That is a challenge, and if you're going to launch T levels, you've got to make sure you've got enough of that. Because clearly the students fail if you can't do that. So it's not without challenges.
Thank you very much. I'm trying very hard not to hog the discussion here, so I will move on to Lord Watson to ask if he would like to contribute.
Yes, thank you to both Jason and Bev. I found the contributions very interesting. I've got a couple of points. One is in terms of the take up of apprenticeships. Since I think about 2015, there has been quite a significant drop in the number of apprenticeships being begun, despite the levy coming into play in 2017. And I'm something of an outlier in the Labour Party. I support the apprenticeship levy quite strongly. It needs to be changed here and there, but it's basically a very good idea because it does ensure that the employers will put aside money for training. But level 2 apprenticeships are an area that I think we don't often give enough thought to. At the higher level, it's more attractive perhaps, but I wonder if either Jason or Bev could say anything about level 2 apprenticeships. I suppose that's what GCSE level really, but not the ones that get much coverage. The other point is just a suggestion I've seen in a couple of recent reports, one of which was the Times education report, was that in terms of apprenticeships, there should be some kind of UCAS model so that young people interested can go online and see what's available in the same way that they can do with university entry. I think if something like that was put together and made available, then I think young people might be more easily convinced, or perhaps I should say their parents should be more easily convinced that there are alternatives, very worthwhile alternatives to going into higher education.
Thank you very much. And Bev and Jason, which of you is going to start?
Jason, yeah, so, thanks for the questions, really good questions. I mean, in reverse, I think the UCAS model was a point I tried to make at the end of my first piece, is about that kind of coherent and really clear offer. And you're absolutely right, careers leaders, people who are advising young people really struggle to navigate their way through what offer might be, both connecting T levels to apprenticeships and the different levels in apprenticeships. Because of the Trailblazer, it's a patchwork. There isn't a very clear, coherent strategy from every T level to level 4 and 5 and then on to degree. It really isn't that clear, and I think there's a real need for that, and an urgency really to really make sure we get that right IAG from the get-go for those learners choosing to take on the T levels. The level 2 apprenticeship, again, quite an odd set of standards that are available on the level 2, and we struggle from the creative industries certainly, because they're looking for those more 18, 19 plus learners, and they are looking for learners slightly more advanced. So it's not something level 2 that we've been heavily involved in. So I can't comment too much, but Bev might be able to add some value on that.
Not on that, but I would like to add this. I think apprenticeships are a fantastic entry level into organisations. However, your point, Lord Watson, about they're kind of falling away a little bit. I think you've phrased it exactly that. That's my way of interpreting it. But I would say this, that in tech, we don't need people locked up in training for 12 months to be productive and possible to be placed into work. Actually, in 3 months, with good training and great projects support, we can get young people into jobs where they're earning money and starting to really develop their career. So I really feel like, especially in the world of tech, where there is massive shortage of skills throughout the UK marketplace, I think we probably need to go back and look at the way things are being set up.
Thank you very much. Peter Bottomley, would you like to ask a question or make a contribution? Yeah, and you're muted at the moment, but assuming you're there. Silence. Right. In that case, let's open the floor to anybody else. And I don't quite know, Oliver, you'll tell me if there's anybody remotely interested in asking a question.
Yes, we have had a few questions in the chat, so I can ask a few at a time. So Nick Hurd asks, are we not experiencing a product of the drive for knowledge-based curriculum that the DfE promotes? If we are to raise the profile of T-levels and apprenticeships, then skills curriculum need to be pushed into schools. Hayley Pells asks, I have experienced feedback that caregivers want more than just an apprenticeship for their loved ones. What more can be done to make apprenticeships a destination rather than a fallback? And then finally, we have from Rebecca, many schools utilise Unifrog as a careers platform, which is subscription-based, where pupils can access the largest UK online platform for apprenticeships vacancies. But this isn't like UCAS in terms of accessibility and publicly available information. So a comment now.
A comment about the, yes, and of course the challenge, I very much support the idea of a UCAS-like scheme, but we have to recognise that the apprenticeships landscape is much more complicated and broad perhaps than the higher education landscape, and I think some of the things that Jason said about making it as coherent as possible will be crucial to be able to provide a meaningful single point of access to find out what is available there. Okay, let's well, there are a few questions there. One on getting schools involved in the skills curriculum much earlier on. One really having apprenticeships recognised as a destination, which is something I feel strongly about. And I know if Baroness Garden was here, she'd be complaining about the lack of celebration of appreciation of apprenticeships and the lack of people's names appearing on honour boards when they've achieved one. And then the third question about the idea of a UCAS-like platform. And over to you again, Jason and Bev. I don't know, are you going to go first again, Jason, or are you going to?
You want to go?
I'll pick up on the one around the schools. Certainly, from our experience, I completely agree with that. We do need to have this taken into schools so that schools are prepared and young people come out ready for what's available to them, apprenticeships, further education, and T-levels. I think they're not prepared today, and I think we need to adapt much more quickly and at speed on a regular basis the school curriculum to prepare young children for the world they're going into today.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, adding to that, Bev, I think, if you look at the last 2 years and clearly the pandemic and, people being, like ourselves, alternative providers, apprenticeship providers going into schools, it's been a no-go. So we have been set back, and clearly the amendments to Baker Clause and schools really extending that broader careers offer is very important, that's kind of enforced, and that, the doors are open for, people with alternative offers, particularly the GFEs and the apprenticeship providers, the independent sector, to be able to go into schools and really make sure we're offering clear IAG to 16-year-olds who, and really, showing the opportunity. Because so I think, the paralysis that's happened is probably a little bit, to do with the pandemic, but we've clearly got to get those doors back open and back in, and it's been a slow restart, really. I wasn't sure what the other questions were, to be fair. So
well, there was the one about the skills curriculum beginning in schools. I thought that was an interesting one, and perhaps the Baker clause will help with that as and when it gets actually taken up and fully implemented, if that's the right word.
yes. Understand that. I mean, I think we'd all love to see more skill-based curriculum, hands-on, vocational, whatever we want to call it, in schools. That's a big nut to crack, but I think fairly essential to give young people that experience, then to be able to look out and carry that on into T levels, because all of the vocational, applied generals, T levels, and apprenticeships are very much that. But that's not really happening at the moment.
Okay, let's see if any. Do either of our? We have a vast audience, as you can see here in the Portcullis House. Do either of our attendees would like to ask a question?
I don't really have a huge question, but I would echo a few comments, and particularly around awareness. I'm from Heathrow Airport, and one of the things recently, and it's almost answers one of Lord Lilly's questions about what government can do. The DfT ran Generation Aviation, which is this campaign about making people aware, both in industry and in local colleges, about the options available for young people in the industry. And it was an opportunity when you can get a lot of fanfare around it. You can have filming opportunities, events, job fairs, and the like. And it was a great promotional opportunity for everyone at Heathrow. That's the retailers, the airlines, the airport, the ground handling, everyone, to make local colleges and students aware, as well as for local students to advertise their sort of talent and then what they can bring. So I feel awareness is a big, both at an industry level and with their sponsored departments, whatever industry they're in, but also through the education system and at a school level.
Thank you. And now John has just joined us. Let's have one more question to let him actually get his clothes off, having travelled from wherever, and prepare to. So do we have any other questions on lined up? Oliver?
Yes, we have. I'm in discussions with UCAS about creating a corporate page for my organisation to start advertising apprenticeship vacancies. So I think they are starting to move towards the direction of advertising apprenticeships vacancies alongside university options. But I'm not sure how well this is known in schools. And then we've had a question also about the attractiveness of apprenticeships, particularly with the national minimum wage, the national apprentices minimum wage, and sort of the lack of applicants. I think that maybe speaks to one of Beth's points as well about accessibility financially.
Should we just start?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, well, the first of those probably relates mostly to John, so let me park that for the moment. But the second one, I think, is a very central theme about accessibility and awareness, and I think I would add a third one relating to T levels, because in the early stages, I was getting the impression that T levels were quite demanding. And I think this relates to something that perhaps Bev was saying. I mean, they are quite academics, obviously the wrong word, but they are exam based. Are there a rather high threshold for some students to tackle? I suppose is my question. So that was that question and the previous one, which I've already forgotten.
I think the point on the high threshold, you're absolutely 100%. It's not, for everyone. You can use the word academic to a sense, because they are more academic than some of the previous kind of applied general courses, but still, learners, learn in different ways, and for a lot of young people, the threshold is too high for.
Okay. Bev, any comment on any of? I think the other one was to do with accessibility, wasn't it?
Yes, and the apprentice minimum wage.
What?
And the apprentice minimum wage.
Yes. I mean, my impression is that an awful lot of apprenticeship employers actually offer the national minimum wage, but maybe that's mistaken.
Certainly for our sector, you know, there's at least that, you know, or above. So really, that's not been an issue, the raising of the minimum wage.
You were just about to speak when I interrupted you.
No, not at all. I think for me, you know, we need to get more young women into the tech industry. I think we need to get people from underrepresented parts of the communities around the UK. And that means actually reaching out, you know, tangibly, not using our usual channels, because our usual channels aren't reaching these individuals. And we also need to help them get to these roles, get to the apprenticeships, get to the T levels, and find, you know, the means, in other words, support them financially as well. Otherwise, we will never, you know, be able to encourage the people that we should be encouraging into this fantastic industry. Tech, you know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be in tech. There are all kinds of roles, and it doesn't really have a minimum threshold. I think, you know, the ability to communicate is probably where we start. And if you want to be a coder, we can teach that at a pace that people are comfortable with.
Thank you. Some very, very good points there about you have to have access. I mean, the challenges for people in areas where there are not the right training available, or they can't get to the right training because of transport issues, or there aren't the employers who, these are issues that I think are quite important in the scheme of things. However, I'm delighted that John Cope, who is Director of Strategy, Policy and Public Affairs at UCAS, is now looking relatively settled and will address us for about 5 minutes, and then we can broaden the range of talent to answer further questions.
And I promise to take off no more clothing than my scarf, just to reassure everyone from earlier. Yes, I'm Director of Strategy at UCAS. I'm also a board member of the Institute for Apprenticeships. So I'm happy to take questions in either of those roles. But I thought just to kick off, I talk about a little bit about what happened on Results Day this year, just because it kind of addresses a lot of the questions that we were talking about. So what we saw on Results Day this year in August was higher demand and higher numbers of applications than ever before. Across all regions, all subjects pretty much, some deviation there, but on the whole demand being much higher, and that's a trend that we expect to see continue over the next decade or so. But what we're seeing is a demographic bulge, we're seeing a demand bulge, and we're also seeing international students increasing in number overall. So when you add that all together, the UCAS forecast for the number of applicants, and these are people who are open-minded to apprenticeships, open-minded to undergraduate, postgraduate, whatever it might be. At the moment, it's about 750,000 people that we support each year. By 2026, it'll be 1 million. So that's a very large increase. And there are huge numbers of sort of policy implications that flow from that. If supply stays the same, for any economists on the line, you will know that the market will become much more competitive. So if there isn't an expansion of higher education, expansion of apprenticeships, we'll see the whole application process become a lot more competitive. And obviously, as we know, going back to the point about access that we were just talking about, in a more competitive situation, it's those with the least means, those with the least support, those with the most disadvantaged backgrounds that on average will come off worse in a more competitive environment. So you will hear UCAS just talking about the competitiveness and the journey to 1 million, as we are calling it in PR terms, over and over again. So well as demand being up, this year we did actually see the most number of disadvantaged students get into university. It was very, given this cohort was, you know, they missed their GCSEs, they missed a lot of their marks, and this group had been hit the hardest by the pandemic. There were lots of concerns they would come off worse, but we saw the most disadvantaged students applying and being accepted. So that was a positive. This year also was another first, so as well as the return to proper exams, it was the first cohort of T-level students. As you can imagine, I was kind of watching the data like a hawk, seeing what was going on, and always worried that, you know, the first cohort would, you know, have all of the problems and all of this kind of stuff with it. We didn't actually see any of those issues. It was remarkably smooth for them. And I caveat this with, it's a small cohort. It's only 1,500 people, but actually 500 of those applied to higher education of some form or another. And we saw an acceptance rate of 80%. So 400 were accepted and got a place. Now that's a higher acceptance rate than A-levels. We shouldn't get too excited. As I said, it's a small cohort, it's the first one, but there were lots of really promising signs there that actually T-levels are coming online well, smoothly, and they are being a step onto some form of higher education or a degree apprenticeship or whatever it may be. I've already mentioned international, so I won't cover that anymore. So what about UCAS on apprenticeships, which is the second point? So I thought I'd just give you a bit of a sense, I suppose, of the overall demand. So of that 750,000 people that I mentioned earlier that set up an account on UCAS.com at the moment, we asked the first time last year, are you interested in doing an apprenticeship? Just to see what that demand was at a really early stage, and 342,000 said yes. So we saw an enormous amount of demand there. That's nearly 50%. Not parity, our aim is to 100% of people to be interested in higher education and 100% of people to be interested in apprenticeships, to have all the options open and only decide towards the end. But it is really, really good progress. And we're also seeing that demand flow through this year as well. So it's not just a flash in the pan last year, we're seeing just as much demand this year. On the more negative side, we do a lot of polling, a lot of surveying of applicants constantly to understand what they're thinking and their sentiment. And one statistic I thought I'd share with you is when we say to applicants, do you consider university prestigious? Do you consider an apprenticeship prestigious? You get about 76% who will say yes, that university is prestigious. When you ask the same question with apprenticeships, it's in the 4 to 5% space. So I'm giving you both a positive and negative there.
4 to 5?
4 to 5%.
45?
4 to 5%. It's within the confidence interval. So what I'm trying to get across there is at UCAS, we are seeing much more demand for apprenticeships. We're seeing young people and adults open-minded, considering apprenticeships more than ever. But what we also see is a continued kind of worry, is an apprenticeship less prestigious? Will it get me a good job? So not job done yet, but really promising signs there. Finally, I thought giving you a sense of, actually one last point on what we're seeing on apprenticeships is just around careers advice. So in that polling and surveying that we do of young people, consistently 1 in 3 will say they get no information on apprenticeships. And this is at colleges and schools. And I find it surprising, to say the least, that colleges are mentioning apprenticeships. So take that statistic with a bit of skepticism. Sometimes young people won't realise they're getting information about apprenticeships, they won't call it when they're asked. But what is consistent is that the amount of careers advice on apprenticeships isn't good enough and could dramatically improve. So that's the picture. Finally, just really quickly, of what could we do to make things better, which I think is always an uplifting way to end. I mentioned careers advice. The more that can be improved, the better. And at UCAS, we struggle to do local careers advice. We're a national charity, but we will always be the sort of lender of last resort. So if you don't get careers advice to your schools or college, we'll make sure that we fill the gap. That isn't always enough. So the more that can be done, the better. Engaging employers in the education system, that I couldn't say that enough. The more employers actually go into schools, go into colleges, that genuinely changes people's aspirations. Rather than a kind of textbook or a teacher saying an apprenticeship is a good idea, hearing from an employer is genuinely a thing that will change things. And the last point of what we can do differently is I painted a picture of huge demand, but soft demand. The real issue that we worry about, I suppose, at UCAS is how do we meet that demand? So we will scrape the National Apprenticeship Service that the government runs, which is a bit of a register and a kind of a list of different apprenticeships out there. We do the same for Scotland, Northern Ireland. We're onboarding Wales as well. We then do our own employer engagement as much as we can. And on results day this year, there was about 5,000 apprenticeships. 500 of those were degree apprenticeships. So you compare that supply with demand that I spoke about earlier, And that's why we worry about supply being the biggest issue. So if there was a very quick win for government that's free, universally popular, something that everyone's always looking for, it would be to mandate apprenticeships onto UCAS.com and onto the government's final apprenticeship portal. Overnight, you would create huge more transparency of the tens of thousands of apprenticeships out there that simply, unless you know someone or happen to be, come across the businesses somewhere or another, you'd never know about. And it would make our lives so much easier when we're delivering the careers advice to meet the demand that we see. I'm not sure if that's 5 minutes, but I hope that was a good oversight of just what we're seeing.
Well, thank you, John. You've completely stolen my thunder, because what I was going to ask was for each of the speakers before we end, just to indicate 1 or 2 things that need to be done in the areas we've been talking about. You already had your shot at that, so I'll come to you last. But also, does anybody have any questions, particularly among the parliamentarians, that they would like to ask specifically to John? No, from Lord Watson, is that a yes? Go ahead.
Yes, it is. It's a very brief one to John. Hello, John. It's good to see and hear from you. I just wonder if you had any comment on the Sutton Trust report that emerged last week, particularly showing the extent to which apprenticeships were being skewed, not just to older people, but to people from better off backgrounds, which is not perhaps, well, it's not what was intended with the extension of apprenticeships through the levy. I wondered if you have any comment on that, because I found it a bit concerning and a bit surprising.
Yes, you've now stolen my thunder as well, because that was my backup suggestion, was to reference the Sutton Trust report, which I agree with you. I mean, I'd start by saying let's be positive. In many ways, the Sutton Trust report is a sign that the system is doing really well. The fact that the middle classes and really engaged parents and people are desiring an apprenticeship and are trying to get them, in many ways is a symptom that actually apprenticeships are becoming really aspirational. So I would just start in a kind of a positive that in many ways it's a symptom of a system that's really improved. On the negative, because no one wants apprenticeships to stop being a rung on the ladder of opportunity. But the difficulty that we have is that when you go over to universities and higher education policy, there are loads of policy levers. So you have the Office for Students, you have fair access plans that every university must sign up to. You've got the Director for Fair Access in a statutory appointment by the Secretary of State, and huge amounts of data. When you go over to apprenticeships, actually those policy levers just don't exist. And so much of it, careers advice, applying and things like that is completely a local process run by an employer. So that's why I see UCAS's role as much as possible to try and create a bit of a level playing field. So if all apprenticeships are on UCAS, what we could do is have a more joined up process that people don't need to apply to each individual employer. They could do a fairer, standardised application process as you do at university. And you start weeding out some of those inequities. But second, you just have huge amounts more transparency. So you'd be able to see, like the university, where there are problems, we have better data, better transparency, and we're able to tackle them. But ultimately, with an Institute for Apprenticeships hat on, it would be good if there was an equivalent to the Director of Fair Access for apprenticeships and skills, somebody who who's a statutory underfooting, who could look at this and was accountable to Parliament and to the Select Committee and whatever, to make sure that apprenticeships stay fair and open.
And can I just understand clearly your final proposal in your talk itself? You were talking about were you suggesting that UCAS itself should be asked, if not mandated, to provide information across the whole field of apprenticeships?
Yeah, so we already do.
You already do something.
It's important to remember we're just an independent charity. So we have no statutory underfooting, no legal powers, we're not a regulator or anything like that. So we exist by merely quality of the service we provide. So the more mandating or requiring for apprenticeships onto UCAS.com, the easier our lives would be and the better experience we could give to applicants. I fully accept that probably have to be an opt-out for employers. So if the employer just didn't want to advertise nationally and just wants to advertise internally, they probably need an opt-out. But just that mandation would just increase the transparency and fairness a lot.
Okay, very interesting. Are there any very urgent questions or issues that we need to bring in the very few minutes we have left, Oliver?
I think that there was just one last one here, which I think is from Daniel Wilson of BT. You know, what the panelists think is the single biggest thing that could help encourage parity of esteem between academic and vocational education?
Okay, that's a good question. In fact, that's a very good thing to knit together with my suggestions. So I'm going to ask each of you to provide one or two things that would either address the parity of esteem issue, or going right back to Lord Lily's question, something that needs to be done and that government could start to look at and think about. And let's go, Bev, you always come second so far. So I'll now put you, probably just the one, maybe would you rather be second? I'm going to put you in the hot seat and ask you to address.
I'm delighted to do that. Thank you for that. So listening carefully to everybody here, I think there's some fantastic suggestions. However, I'm going to champion the classes that don't get the best opportunities here. So what I would be recommending here is, instead of asking the question, you know, what do you see more prestigious, which, you know, in its own nature actually kind of lends itself to middle class and upwards, I would ask what will apprenticeships give me career opportunities to make a great life? Because you know, I think this is the question that people would probably want answered. And then I'd love to hear more. And I know somebody had posted something on the chat here about BT doing something similar, but I'd like us to promote through all the social channels and all of the advertising that we can use to ask leaders from companies who went the apprenticeship route to enter the workplace to really speak publicly about it and what advantage it gave them, to encourage young people to see this as a really great path to enter the workplace and build a career and a life off the back of that. Thank you for the opportunity.
And of course, one of those leaders who should certainly be doing that is our current Secretary of State for Education, Gillian Keegan, who was herself an apprentice. Jason.
Yes, thank you. I totally agree with you, Bev. I think it is about the aspiration of young people. I think successful case studies in the marketplace, I think always support, because, you know, let's be clear, you know, the prestigiousness of going to HE is no guarantee whatsoever. And we do need to get that point across. And I think there's some fantastic examples in all of our businesses of people who have gone on and been very successful in the apprenticeship arena. So we certainly do need to, you know, champion that and put that voice loud and clear. Just one point, just for John, whilst there, just something that we've seen this year when you talked about T-levels, John. We've had a number of our learners who want to go on to university with their T-level but can't get into the desired universities because they don't have the A-level maths. And this is a computer-based T-level. Now, clearly, we're working through that. But 2 years ago, we predominantly looked at the UCAS points that they generated and gave them the IAG accordingly. But now they're coming up against barriers with quite a few universities that, you know, they won't accept them onto those particular courses. I say, in case you're not already aware of it, because that is something that we've certainly now fine-tuned our IAG from the get-go, but it could hold back some of the growth in those T-levels, particularly in digital and that we're doing.
Thank you, Jason. And John, a final word from you.
Jason underscores the importance of careers advice, and that T-level experience will be experienced by A-level students as well. There are lots of entry requirements that universities will put on that aren't A-levels, so lots will require other things. So that you're spot on, Jason. And I throw in another one because I mentioned quite a few bits, but one area about accessibility and making apprenticeships and all technical education accessible. It's just thinking about the difference between them and higher education. If you can travel to university and you can go and study medicine at the best medicine university, you've got maintenance, you've got student finance, and that's totally normal. if you're somebody like me who's from Grimsby and you aspire to go into pharmaceuticals, let's take that as an example, there are going to be apprenticeships or T-level placements locally. Just because the economy in Grimsby does not provide that, I can assure you. But that's so there's an inconsistency there with higher education, T-levels and apprenticeships. So there is going to be, as the whole system grows and grows and grows, there is going to be a point we're going to have a conversation about how does somebody with a career aspiration X, but their local economy has none of X, how does the system make sure that that person's career aspiration isn't killed in that moment?
Thank you, John. Yeah, I think that's one of the strongest points that's come home to me is the challenges for the people who, for whom apprenticeships are less available or less, of which they're less aware. I mean, we see lots of apprentices here. They're all extremely impressive, and they all work for very large, well-known firms, and they don't have the kinds of challenges of coming from areas like you and like people that has talked about where it's very difficult. Right, I mustn't cause us to overrun even more than we already have. I would like to thank all our speakers very much for their contributions to what, as often with this group, is a very interesting and challenging session that raises all sorts of important issues to which I certainly don't have clear answers about what needs to be done, but I think there are some clear thoughts about the directions in which work is needed. And thank you to everybody else who's taken part. Those I have to say rather few who struggle to get to here and make this and populate this rather large table, and all of you who've taken part online. Thank you very much indeed, and have a very good Christmas, and hope that you get to where you want to be for Christmas, and that you will be with us for the next Apprenticeships Group meeting in the new year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.